Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about how my team and I have been investigating the effect of composition and preparation on pancakes. So to start, pancakes are a very large part of the American diet, as you know. I'm pretty sure we've all eaten pancakes at some point, and as well as the global diet, because right now the global pancake industry market value is at $940 million. And in 5 years, they predict it's going to get to about a trillion, or not a trillion, billion. Trillion's too much, but a billion, which is still crazy. And that's because so many people love to eat pancakes. A survey of 1,000 Americans that they did last year showed that 60% of them love pancakes. 60% of them answered love to how much they care about pancakes. 34% said like, 60% said love. So that again shows how prevalent they are to our diet and how prevalent they have been. Because actually, back in the day when there were a lot of farmers, they ate a lot of pancakes because they were very easy to make. They contain almost all the food groups, so they were just a good like energy booster to get them through the rest of the day. So that's why it's important to study the parameters of pancakes and what goes into making them and how you can change the outcome, because for these reasons, to satisfy people's taste needs as well as satisfy people's health needs, allergy needs, anything like that. So that's why it's important to study these things. So first, we're going to look at how the science behind the pancake batter. So when you're making pancake batter, you have your wet ingredients in one bowl and your dry ingredients in another. And the dry ingredients is mostly flour, and the two proteins that make up dry flour are gliadin and gluten. And when you put the wet ingredients into the dry flour, those two proteins become hydrated and they swell and they come together to form this matrix. And as you're mixing the batter, that matrix turns into gluten. So it goes through a thiol disulfide exchange. And what that does is that it creates these bridges between those two proteins, and those bridges have gaps in them. And those gaps can be filled with fat globules, the air pockets or the air bubbles, because the leavening agent creates air. When you're mixing, we're taking in air as well. And this has an effect on the size of the pancake, essentially the dimensions of the pancake, the height and the diameter. And it also creates those little air bubbles that you see in a cooked pancake. So to start, we looked at how changing gluten content has effect on the height and the diameter of the pancake. So going left to right, looking at our protein types, we have most amount of gluten to least amount of gluten. So all-purpose flour has the most, protein powder has no gluten. And gluten essentially is a very strong protein, right? So the more gluten you have in your pancake batter, the more viscous the pancake batter is, because it's highly structured and it's very strong. So when you're pouring your batter onto the griddle, it's not going to spread out as much. So the more gluten you have, the higher the height of the pancake and the smaller the diameter. And as you can see here, we did get that trend except for the wheat flour pancakes, because unfortunately, we researched this later on because we saw that our wheat flour pancakes were raw whenever we took them off, but we wanted to keep the cooking times consistent. But wheat flour takes a lot longer to cook than the other flours. So we think that if we did cook it for longer, it would have fit in with the trend. Next, we looked at how changing the saturation of the fat in pancakes has an effect on pancake dimensions. So again, as we said before, the fat globules go inside that gluten matrix. And when you cook the pancake, the fat kind of forms a film on the outside of that pocket that it was in. And the bigger the globule, the more height there will be in the pancake. And this has to do with melting point. So going left to right on here, we have highest melting point to lowest melting point. Now, unfortunately, as you can see, shortening has the highest melting point, but it had the smallest height. And also, again, I forgot to say, it doesn't have an effect on diameter. This is just for height. And this is because when we were making the wet ingredient mixture, when we mix the butter into the melted fats into the milk, they would clump up a little bit, and shortening clumped up so much because it has such a high melting point. So it was like barely incorporated into the pancake mixture because it just like it just tried to maintain its structure. So we do think that if we could like better incorporate it, then it would have the highest height. Lastly, we looked at mixing time of the pancake batter. So again, when you're mixing the batter, you're forming gluten. But if you over mix, what happens is that you end up releasing some of those air bubbles that I said before that we are trapping. So it kind of contradicts with what we were talking about with the flour, where the more gluten you have, the taller the height should be. And in this case, when you're mixing, you're generating more gluten formation, but you're also, if you over mix the batter, you're releasing some of those air bubbles. So as you can see in the height chart, as time goes on, this is 5 minutes is a very high mixing time for that little bit of batter. So those air bubbles were released, and it doesn't have an impact on diameter at all. It shouldn't. So to conclude, we now have a stronger understanding of pancake characteristics. If you want a tall pancake, use a very saturated fat. Do not mix for too long, and use a flour that has a higher gluten content. And if you want like a flatter pancake, use vegetable oil because those flat globules are very small. You can use protein powder, cake flour, so on and so forth. So now we have a stronger understanding of what goes into these pancakes, and we looked at a bunch of different ingredients, and we can, now we know how to tailor to everybody's individual needs. Okay, and that is it.